Hi, my name is Shannon Banks. I'm a Master Action Learning Coach with the World Institute for Action Learning and Managing Director of Be Leadership. I'm really happy to be part of the WIAL Global Action Learning Week. I'm looking forward to watching lots of the sessions and learning alongside all of you. And today I thought I would share some tips and techniques for preparing problem presenters for effective action learning. I've taught the WIAL certification courses in the UK for a number of years, and this is something that comes up for a lot of people that I work with, and it's something that I've really struggled with over the years. So I'm really hoping that this will help to enhance your practice. We all know as coaches that there are 6 components for action learning, and these are a group of 4 to 8 people with diverse perspectives, the practice of reflective questioning and listening, a balance between learning and taking action, and a coach, and finally, a project, challenge, or problem to work on. But I learned quite early on what happens if one of those components is missing. In my early days of action learning, I was running a program with a group of IT talent, and it was quite a large group, and I was one of a number of coaches, and I had helped to establish the program as well. And I got into my action learning group, and my problem presenter, who was an IT executive, started sharing her problem, and within about half an hour of what was going to be a multi-day session, the team figured out that she had actually resolved this problem with her leadership team in the weeks prior. So she had come to this session thinking sort of like an academic exercise, and also thinking she would get validation that they had made the right decision. This was really disappointing for me as the coach, and it really opened my eyes to the importance of properly preparing your problem presenter. So the question is, if you have a problem, great, but is it real? Is it urgent? And does it actually meet the criteria that make for effective action learning? Now, when we use action learning, from my experience, there are 4 blockers to making it as effective as it could be that involve the problem presenter. The first is an example like that one, where the problem presenter considers it an academic exercise. And when the problem presenter approaches it in that way, they usually bring a problem that isn't actually real and isn't actually urgent. And what ends up happening as a result of that is that participants feel demoralized and unempowered. The second blocker that can come up in action learning is that the problem presenter can bring a challenge that they're not accountable for. So they can sometimes bring a challenge that maybe their boss is accountable for, or someone on their team is accountable for. And so when you get to actually actioning that problem, they aren't able to really be committed to the actions. And so the team make a lot less progress on the actual problem. Again, it's really demoralizing, and there's a lot less learning because there's a lot less action. The third is that the problem might not actually be urgent. When I first started using action learning, before I was introduced to WIAL, I was in a corporate role, and we used what the company was calling action learning on a number of problems. But when I did research to understand why it wasn't really very powerful, I learned that vice presidents were bringing challenges that weren't actually real and weren't actually urgent, because they said, actually, if I have a real or an urgent problem, someone's already working on that. So the third challenge is making sure that the problem is real or urgent, because it's really difficult to get to actions if they're not. Finally, the fourth challenge or fourth blocker is if the problem isn't scoped appropriately for action learning. So if you have an hour to solve a problem and you're working on something that needs several months, it's very, very difficult then to make the progress you need to make. So you have to make sure that you actually scope the problem appropriately for the time you have available so that you can get to tangible deliverables. Right, so when I'm thinking about preparing a problem presenter and setting up an action learning program, there are 3 questions that I ask that you can ask yourself. So the first one is, what is the broader context for the action learning that you're working on? And I'll get into the details of these in a minute to help you think about them. But that's the first one. So what's the context that you're working within? What are the considerations that you should have around the action learning? The second question is, when you start understanding the challenges that are being brought, how well do those actually meet the core criteria for action learning? And finally, the third is, what support can I provide to increase the impact I can have with this problem presenter? They're all sort of interlinked, but I want to talk through them, and hopefully this will give you some tips and techniques that will help you with your problem presenters. So first, what is the broader context for the action learning? The questions I ask or what I think about are these types of considerations. So first of all, is it a single problem or is it multiple problems? And what is the broader context for the session, i.e., is it within a business meeting? Is it within a leadership development program? Because this dictates how much access you might have to your problem presenter ahead of time and how well you'll be able to scale to actually talk to your problem presenter ahead of the session. Ideally, of course, we speak to our problem presenters before we go into the action learning. But actually, as you look down this list of considerations, there are a wide range of reasons why that might not be possible. And then you need to be flexible and think about how you can get access to your action learning problem presenter anyway. And I'll talk in the last point about options for that. So other considerations are the size of the program or the numbers of groups that are working concurrently. If you're running a program like I ran once at Microsoft where there were 25 action learning groups all running at once, it wasn't possible for us to in-person physically prepare each of those problem presenters for that program. Sometimes it's 1 hour and a half or 2 hours that you have in the middle of a business meeting with some senior executives. And again, you might not get a chance to really specifically talk in advance to them about that problem. You want to, if you can, but I believe in being pragmatic, and I know from experience that sometimes you can't. So you need to find ways to be agile, flexible, and still make sure you have adequately prepared for the action learning session. So these are the types of considerations that I think about and try to think through my options around as I set up the action learning. Okay, so the second is, how well does the challenge meet the core criteria? So assuming you have found a way to get access to the challenge, you really need it to meet a set of criteria. And I find that exposing your potential problem presenters to these criteria will help them select a problem that's really appropriate for the action learning. And so here are the criteria that I think about and that I talk to my problem presenters about that I think that help make it a success. You probably have a similar list, but even though I have it, it helps me to have it in a document that I can then refer to, I can send to people as I set up my action learning programs. So criteria that I think about include these. First is, who is accountable for the problem? Is the problem presenter actually responsible for taking action on this challenge? If the answer is no, then they're not the right person to be there to represent that challenge. The second is it real? We don't want it to be hypothetical. We don't want it to be made up. I always ask, is it keeping you up at night? Because that indicates that it's real and that it's significant and that it might even be urgent. So all of these considerations, is it real? Is it significant? Is it pressing? Really matter to the success of the work. Is it unresolved? Going back to my story at the start, if it has been resolved, it's not appropriate for the action learning. This should be something that does not yet have a solution. We learn in our action learning coach certification about the difference between a problem and a puzzle. And that's another one that I often describe to people, like, would it help for lots of people with lots of different perspectives and really smart brains to come together to try to solve this problem? Are there lots of different possible solutions to this problem? If so, great. It will work well for action learning. And finally, is it actionable? We want the problem presenter to leave with actions. Most problems, real problems, are actionable, but it's never too early to start telling your problem presenter that you're going to ask them to say at the end what actions they're going to take as a result of the problem, because that starts getting their brain going and being aware that that's part of what they're signing up for. So there you go. Those are the criteria for success. Now let's talk about my third question, which is, what support can I provide as the coach to increase the impact? And this takes us back to the first question, really, about the context and the considerations, because there are many ways to support problem presenters. And these ways start well before the action learning begins. So first is, even if I know I may not get face time with my problem presenter for whatever reason, I always send some sort of written instructions to them. So this could be in email, it could be a document that you create and attach, but it includes those core criteria. If there's enough time, ideally you have an email exchange around the draft problem. So you have them send it to you in a few sentences, because if they can write it in a few sentences, they can also articulate it in a few sentences at the start of the problem solving. So if you get a chance, you do an email exchange around this. If you have more time, or in certain circumstances, you might get to do even more. And again, I say to you, the more exposure the problem presenter has to action learning, their role, a good problem, the more successful the action learning is likely to be. But I believe in agility and pragmatics, so you have to figure out what's possible. The next thing you can do is a short introduction to action learning and the problem presenter role. If I can get phone time with the person, or a Zoom call with the person, or a short hallway conversation with the person, then I explain action learning to them, even if they've heard it in a big group, and their role specifically. The fact that they're going to introduce the problem in just a couple of minutes, and we don't want more because it introduces bias. The fact that I'm going to ask them for actions at the end. The fact that they can also ask questions. So all of these things I kind of reiterate to my problem presenters. Again, if there's more time, oftentimes when you ask for a problem and they're not familiar with action learning, what you actually get is a goal. I think another of our colleagues, Peter, is doing a session during the Global Learning Week on problem versus goal. It's an important learning, and it's one that people really struggle with. But if I hear a problem like, how do I increase my revenue over the next 6 months, anything that starts with how do I, or how do we, or how can we, it's a goal. It's not a current state, it's a future state. Now, if you have 3 or 4 days to work on the problem, it might be okay for them to bring a goal. And you can work with the whole team and coach them to get back to the problem. But if you only have 90 minutes, it can be helpful to actually talk to your problem presenter about the difference between a problem and a goal, and see if they're able to articulate the current state. So what's stopping them, what's lacking, what is making this a challenge for them today? Okay, so if I have time, I take that opportunity. All right, brief touch base just before the session starts to answer any questions that they have, to reiterate the role. If I get a chance to do that, sometimes that's a great way just to get in there right before and make sure that their expectations are correct. You could do that even virtually if you have them join the session just a tiny bit early. If you're physically in a meeting while people are on a break right before, you can grab them ahead of time. And then finally, the last ones are really while you're doing the action learning. So in the session, I'm sure many of you as action learning coaches ask questions in interventions around where would you like to focus given the time we have remaining. That can be very effective in order to refocus the problem presenter on what they're trying to achieve and on the problem that they had. And then finally, one that my team and I do when we're doing longer sessions over a few days or a longer period is doing one-to-one coaching with the problem presenter between sessions. That can be a really effective way of enhancing their questioning and making sure that they get the maximum value from the session. So there you have it. There are many ways to support and prepare problem presenters for action learning. And I just want to close by saying I hope that you all have a fantastic learning week and that it's a great opportunity to get to know other people in the community and also enhance your coaching. And I know I'm looking forward to participating myself. So good luck with your action learning and with preparing your problem presenters for your next session. Thank you very much.